Blizzard has what it takes to fix World of Warcraft. The question is, will they? And it looks like we're not going to get any answers on this before BlizzCon 2019. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Friday, October 11th, 2019. Let's start the show.
MultimediaJay Radio Style.
And just like that, it's Friday. Once again, I'm exhausted from a long week, and it's time to do just one more podcast before calling intermission on this World of Warcraft stuff with all eyes on BlizzCon 2019. So let's recap where we've come from and where we're going, and what exactly I'm looking for when those Blizzard brass take the stage at the beginning of November in a couple of weeks. The number one question that I have, which Blizzard needs to answer at BlizzCon, is the question that I'm sure a lot of people who play World of Warcraft have been asking as well. What has been the effect of Classic WoW on where Blizzard wants to take the regular game? How is modern WoW going to change because of what has happened with Classic? The big difference in numbers of concurrent users and people subscribing to play the game. The big difference in Classic servers standing on their own, while modern WoW servers have to be propped up with band-aid features such as cross-realm zones. The immersion of a crude, rough draft version of Azeroth by today's standards, because of a few dumb details like the mobs that you fight having higher health pools and doing more damage and making the world feel more dangerous, or even the AI of things like low-level bandits, where in the modern game they seem randomly placed by some RPG Maker program, and in the original game they hang around tents and have camps, and if you attack one, you'd better be ready to handle them all because they're all going to come after you. What lessons, if any, has Blizzard learned from the launch of WoW Classic, and how is the regular version of the game going to change as a result of this? Now, some of the answers to this question may involve large features that can only be put into the next expansion. Well, that's exactly what I expect to hear about at BlizzCon 2019. And let's also not forget the PR fiasco that was BlizzCon 2018 with Diablo Immortal, and hey, do you guys not have phones? And just Blizzard being out of touch with what their player base actually wants. Even, the folks in the player base who actually wouldn't mind this game getting better, like myself. I would not mind if World of Warcraft became a more competitive MMO similar to Elder Scrolls Online. I wouldn't even mind if they flat out ripped off ZeniMax to fix their own game. But with what I've seen when I've tried talking about this stuff on the forums, and from what kinds of responses the various uploads on YouTube that I have about World of Warcraft have gotten, depending on how much I jump on the Bash Blizzard bandwagon or not, sadly, as always, the World of Warcraft player base is full of toxic individuals who don't want the game to get better because manufactured misery is their thing, and having never-ending stuff to complain about in WoW is their thing. You can see this for yourself. Just compare the forums of World of Warcraft versus the forums of ESO. You'll find substantially more personal attacks and other, verbal slaps across the face, so to speak, in what kinds of responses things get on Blizzard's forums, which, by the way, again, have been redone from scratch multiple times, versus the kind of professionalism and way more cordial attitudes that you see in ESO land, which bleeds over into the game, by the way, when you get dungeon groups where folks are relatively constructive and don't all quit the group after a single wipe, or they actually know what avoidable damage is, or they try to actually engage the mechanics even on the lowest difficulty level, as opposed to an angry person I heard venting in WoW's chat channels a while back who was like, I was an LFR. We had this sandbagger only doing 3k DPS at level 120 and item level 400, blah, blah, whatever. I said, kick the guy, he's sandbagging, and they said, shut up, it's LFR. So yeah, Blizzard has a lot of work to do. But with what happens when you try to go through the proper channels to submit constructive feedback, I wonder if they can even get the feedback that they need to fix their game. So, what's the story with Blizzcon? Here's the thing. For the first time in a while, this upload is going to have a companion blog entry, which I released last night, with the 2 discussion videos from Ian Hazakostas about the Ashara patch and the N'Zoth patch. I think I might have mixed up 8.3 with 8.2.5 at some point in my discussions on this matter. But the point is, when talking about the Ashara patch, Ian Hazakostas talked about the content, and then he talked about the underlying philosophy behind it at the time. But this is before Classic launched. Now that Classic is out, I am very curious what his follow-up is to his discussion about things like class identity versus spec identity that he talked about with the reveal video or whatever for the Ashara patch. Now the N'Zoth patch has been plugged, so to speak, and that discussion with Hazakostas was noticeably different. It was just content. There was no discussion about the why, just the what. So there was no talk about game design or philosophy or what exactly Blizzard is doing with their game. Now, in order to not assume the worst every single time, like a lot of WoW players do, I'm giving Blizzard's folks the benefit of the doubt that some of the things they could have talked about in that second part of the video for the N'Zoth patch that didn't happen are being deliberately withheld because they're still under NDA, because these kinds of big ideas are only appropriate to be announced at a big event like BlizzCon, which is in a few short weeks. So I will be paying very close attention to what gets discussed at BlizzCon 2019, because some of these ideas that would make World of Warcraft more interesting versus ESO and whatnot can only really be added in as a new feature in an expansion. So for example, Time Walker mode. The idea that I have where you go to your capital city, you talk to a member of the Bronze Dragon Flight, and just like with War mode, you turn on Time Walker mode, which syncs you to the maximum level of every zone that you go through. So that way you are never all that much more powerful than the mobs in the area. So if there's an older part of the world that you like going back to every so often to do daily quests or whatnot, you can go back there and not have it be super boring. And much like with War mode, you would be placed in a different phase from the people that had it switched off. So the people that still wanted to go around one-shotting everything can do so. And they won't get in the way of the people that want to still do the old content or do something else and have it not be completely boring because they're one-shotting everything. What I'm getting at here with these kinds of ideas is that Blizzard has this thing right now for having the technology to fix problems with modern WoW, but not actually taking the initiative to do so. Let's take server queues, for example. If you run into a server queue in World of Warcraft, you're running into something that doesn't need to exist anymore. Classic being the wild card, because Classic has to be based on how the olden days worked and how the bad old days worked, so server queues will be part of that. But if, for example, modern WoW became super popular again and there were server queues, you would be looking at a sign that Blizzard hasn't been using their technology properly. They've had connected realm technology, I believe, since Mists of Pandaria. And instead of using it to try and make dead servers feel not so dead, they could have linked up a high pop to a low pop realm and then used free character moves to balance the populations on servers without taking away the benefits of the high pop realms that attract people to them in the first place. I've been saying this since Warlords of Draenor. So 5 years later, when are they going to do something about this? They have the technology to make server queues a thing of the past. There should never be a server queue in World of Warcraft ever again. Their operations team has everything they need with the technology they've come out with in the last several years at this point in order to make that happen. Another example of this to look out for in the coming years with modern WoW is the improved AI that Blizzard has been experimenting with things like island expeditions for the PvP NPCs to make them less like AI and more like players. This kind of AI could be exported into the mobs in the outdoor world to make the world more immersive and more difficult. Now, granted, outdoor mobs don't need to be able to make it like 1v1 if you're fighting them, so that every fight versus a single mob is like PvP. We don't need that sort of thing. However, the AI, to make them a little bit more believable as enemies that you're fighting. So you fight a bunch of bandits, and one of them, you beat them up enough, they run off and try and get their buddies to join the fight because you're near a bandit camp or something like that, or they signal to their buddies or whatever. With how Blizzard has experimented with enhanced AI for PvPvE, so to speak, with some of the stuff where you fight the other faction but it's not actual players, this could be the testing ground to improve the AI in the outdoor world mobs to increase the world difficulty that way. Even if Blizzard doesn't increase the health pools or the damage of the outdoor mobs to make things more dangerous in the outdoor world. This kind of pattern of Blizzard coming up with the technology to fix problems but not taking that next step is exactly the sort of thing to look for with the things people are upset about with World of Warcraft in the coming years. And so here's how this fits in to the whole BlizzCon thing. Because some of these more radical ideas that would improve this game would only really make sense in the context of a new expansion, they need to be brought up this year. And even if some of these ideas are too new to actually be part of the launch of the expansion, it needs to be brought up that it'll come out during some patch or something like that during the course of the next expansion. But Blizzard has experimented with all kinds of new technologies like war mode, party sync, etc. for the current half-cooked trial iterations, as I refer to them, of those technologies to remain the way they are when other games are making more robust use of systems like that. Likewise, Blizzard also needs to not just keep advertising new content over and over, but take a look at how all of the content ties together. Because if you look at the decline of WoW over the last 10 years, and what has happened roughly since late Lich King or so sometime around right after Ulduar, and I agree with Asmongold and the other streamers who say that that's really when things started to go downhill with the subscriber numbers. If you look at the underlying philosophy behind the game, starting in late Lich King when you started having more catch-up options and whatnot, invalidating older content, that's when you start to realize the so-called World of Warcraft does not live up to its name. You don't really have a world that gets bigger as you become more of an accomplished adventurer, as is the case in other games. What you have is essentially a theme park MMO, and not just a theme park MMO, but I would dare say a school class field trip MMO, where the teacher's holding your hand or whatnot, and you're running around, hey, look at this, now hurry up, let's all go look at this, or whatever. I don't know about you, but I remember some school field trips that were a little behind schedule when I was a kid, where we barely had time to even see what we were there for because the teachers would be like, okay, we gotta move on, okay, we gotta move on, okay, we gotta move on, okay, we gotta move on. So, and that's kind of what I'm reminded of with the way Blizzard handles their own content. Oh, you really like the scenery in Grizzly Hills? Okay, we gotta move on, okay, we gotta move on, okay, we gotta move on. That sort of thing. But hey, somebody's paying their $15 a month. Who cares if every so often they want to take a break from whatever progression they're doing to just go hang out in a pretty looking zone, hunt bears, and do some fishing? Well, guess what? In ESO, you can do that. In Guild Wars 2, you can do that. In World of Warcraft, it'll be boring because you will destroy everything with 500,000 damage per hit because of the unintended consequences of the stat squish. It's called player freedom. This is the direction that MMOs have gone in since Guild Wars 2. And World of Warcraft is the furthest behind in this race. If the Blizzard devs take the stage at BlizzCon and they do what Hazakostas did in the 8.3 discussion video, all they talk about is content, content, content. Look at the next expansion. Content, content, content. There's going to be all this new stuff to do. There's going to be all these new things to do. Then I'm going back to ESO. I don't care how good the content's going to be in the next expansion. I don't care how well Blizzard tries to sell it. If Blizzard doesn't recognize after this many years of decline and the launch of WoW Classic, putting the stark differences between the World of Warcraft of yesteryear and the World of Warcraft of today back on the table. If Blizzard doesn't realize that the world has changed since the heady days of the big television ad campaigns and celebrity endorsements and 12 million subscribers, ladies and gentlemen, delusional is what they are. It's a different world. What they've been doing hasn't been working, and other stuff has. If they can't figure this out, they need to be left to stew in their own juices, so to speak. How many more times will commentators, folks in the media, shareholders, investors, all kinds of folks who have anything to say about Blizzard whatsoever have to say that Blizzard is out of touch with their customers? And how many more times are these folks going to have to demonstrate that they're out of touch with their customers before someone finally admits that, yes, they are probably out of touch with their customers? So at this point, I really don't care what the new content is going to be in the expansion. I've seen this all before. Blizzard saying, hey, come back to the game, we're releasing this new content, it's going to be amazing. I've seen this before. I've seen new expansions launch before with nice new content. I've seen new storylines and villains and raid bosses and all of that stuff. That's not what this game needs right now. What this game needs is a better setup regarding all of the content in the game, not just the current stuff. The current content needs to mesh better with everything else in the game. This is what has been missing since things started to decline in late Lich King, since the game's plateau, since Blizzard adopted this attitude of only the current content matters, and stuff kept going obsolete, whereas other games actually keep the old content worth doing. So if you have to play catch up later on, or if you want to see a zone story later on, a feature that WoW now has, sort of, like many other features that they have that other games also have, sort of, that it's not totally boring and you're not one-shotting everything with 500,000 damage per attack. That's the kind of stuff that needs to be fixed. Same thing with Classic mode that I was talking about, which would create the kind of Classic Plus opportunities without regular Classic having to be changed in order to put stuff in after Naxxramas. In order to make WoW Classic, it's in the making of video for it, Blizzard had to marry up patch 112's data with a semi-recent version of the game and even remake some stuff from scratch, like some of the stuff with Hunters. In getting WoW Classic playable and releasable, they have the technology to put the pre-Cataclysm Azeroth back into modern WoW and have you either start there at character creation or be able to go back there later on through the Bronze Dragonflight NPCs and whatnot. They have the technology so that the people that want classic but not 100% classic, like classic with a dungeon finder, or classic with transmog, or classic with classic plus content, or stuff like that, or things added after Naxxramas. Blizzard has shown through the technology they've been working on that they have what it takes to fix many, if not all, of these underlying problems with World of Warcraft. The question now is, when are they actually going to follow through on it? So all eyes are on Blizzcon. If it's nothing but content, new stuff, then Blizzard has learned nothing as far as I'm concerned, and I should go play other games like ESO. I don't want to see a gigantic content plug on those stages. Blizzard has been plugging content for years, even as the game has declined. Content is not going to turn this ship around. Blizzard needs to look at the entire experience, not just the new stuff they can razzle-dazzle the audience with. The goggles fell off my face a long time ago when it comes to these kinds of sales presentations, and whether or not Blizzard wants to fix the overall state of the game as opposed to just bragging about some new dungeon or landmass or whatever that they're coming out with. We're past the point where Blizzard can just razzle-dazzle at BlizzCon with, look at all this new stuff, without looking at everything and how it fits together. Because if they won't, their competitors will, their competitors do, and their competitors have already done. And this is where I drop the mic, not literally, because I don't want to break this Blue Yeti after all these years. And this is where I say all eyes are on BlizzCon 2019 to see where this goes from here. Because with some of these more radical ideas that would really improve this game, I can't imagine them coming out any other time than with a new expansion. And if they don't come out this time, how many years are we going to have to wait before Blizzard gets another chance to do this? No, it needs to be 2019. It needs to be November 1st and 2nd. It needs to be during this upcoming convention. It needs to be sooner rather than later. And I don't mean Blizzard's definition of soon. We shall see. I never intended for this channel to go off on this podcasting tangent for so long, but I found out about all that noise sampling, noise reduction stuff over the summer, and it solved my problems with how to podcast while running an air conditioner or a fan or whatever else in the background. So, and this whole thing with World of Warcraft is largely due to my own curiosities about Classic. But I'm still an ESO guy. I still want to make gaming videos, not just podcasts that are all audio like this. And I still, if I want to tinker with some technology and stuff like that, want to make tech videos as well. This is a variety channel. It's just I keep going off on all these tangents for long periods of time that make it not look like one. So this is where I'm calling intermission on all of this stuff. I want to see what Blizzard does next, and whether or not they're even capable of learning what they need to learn to fix this game. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.